Welcome to this research presentation. Today what I'd like to do is talk to you about some specific research findings relevant to the regional tropical city of Cairns in North Queensland, Australia, in terms of its creative industries. In a previous presentation, I explained and contextualised two key concepts, the creative industries concept and also one referred to as the creative class. Both are well-recognised concepts formally in academic literature and also in government policy and government planning. So what I'd like to do is refer to some specific research that I conducted in the year 2011 and 12 and which is ongoing, but these are some of the preliminary findings. So what I set out to do was explore both creativity and creative industries as applied to the Cairns region. Let me give a little bit of context about the city of Cairns. It sits up in far north Queensland on the coast beside the amazing Great Barrier Reef and with wonderful rainforest hinterlands around it. So it's a very strong tourist destination in Australia. In fact, it's typically third or fourth in terms of the most popular tourist destinations in our country. But Cairns has been studied endlessly around its tourism and other issues, but in terms of its creative industries, there is virtually no formal research that's been completed. While there have been some related or allied studies that explore such things as Cairns markets or some aspects of the Indigenous art market, for example, the broader sector hasn't yet been studied to any significant depth. So I set out to explore these issues using an explanatory research design, which essentially means starting with some surveys, following it up with some explanatory-oriented interviews, where issues that came through the survey were further explained in interviews. In terms of who completed these, using publicly available databases, invitations were sent out to approximately 250 creative practitioners to complete a survey, and 78 did so, representing a response rate of around about 27%. Of those 78 participants, 21 volunteered to participate in the interviews, and those people did so. And that occurred over approximately a 6-month period. So, what were some of the headline findings about Cairns in relation to their creative industries and also general issues around creativity? Well, firstly, and as is common in the creative industries, diversity was certainly present. There are traditional artists working in Cairns right through to commercially oriented practitioners such as in the photography, design and even software design field, for example. The second headline finding was around public policy and planning. Most participants had very little engagement with public policy, strategic documents, and all of the work that governments and other groups do to help grow creative sectors and grow the creative industries. So that was particularly interesting. The third headline finding was around the nature of the career paths. And again, reflecting the general trend of creative industries practitioners, there's a lot of individual orientation, a lot of freelance work, a lot of project-based work, right through to formal employment in such traditional roles as government or for larger organisations. The surveys also pointed to a number of growth opportunities. There were many put forward by participants, ranging from partnerships with other groups, through to opportunities for government to work more closely with other areas, as well as a need for greater cohesion in the sector. And finally, the fifth main headline finding to come from the surveys was about leadership. Creative industries tend to be very fractured, very fragmented, people doing all sorts of things that others aren't aware of. The complete range of practice from the individuals working in their home studios through to organisations, through to groups in the middle aiming to present their work or to grow their creative practice. So leadership is one of the big issues as well. Just before I was talking about a surprise finding in relation to engagement with public policy and planning, and think about the investment that government makes in producing strategic documents that guide localities and that guide government as they invest. So, in terms of the survey, 5 different policies or strategic or cultural plans were presented to the participants, and they were asked to rate those from 1, I have very little knowledge, through to 5, I have extensive knowledge. And very interestingly, of those 5, and let me explain what they were, that was the local council's Arts and Cultural Plan, the Arts Queensland, which is the statewide cultural sector plan, the Australia Council Plan, which is the one guiding our country, then through to more commercially oriented plans through the Advanced Cairns Economic Plan and the Cultural Tourism Strategy supported by Arts Nexus. And all 5 were rated on average less than 3, meaning on average the participants did not even have a moderate level of understanding of what was in those plans or policies, nor did they regularly engage with them. So that was very interesting. So that came through the survey. So one of the most obvious questions in the interviews was, why do you think that is the case? And here are some of the views of the participants in the interviews. One person referred to the fact that it's bureaucratic talk and it's by marketing people. So why should we read it? Why should we engage with it? Another referred to the fact that it's not marketed well. We don't know where to find it, we don't know where to see it, we don't know how to get our hands on it. A third person referred to the need for more public information sessions, but then also referred to the fact that, well, that could be for a lack of interest from us, or it could be that they're not pushing them hard enough either. Another view came from an artist who referred to the fact, well, we know they're out there, it's just we don't go looking for them. They're not in your face, so we have to go look for it. And then an interesting final view came from a performer who said, well, it's actually mental laziness. Everybody wants everybody else to do it for them. So some interesting views there and a range of views. But certainly for planners and cultural policy development officers, there is a lack of engagement, certainly in the Cairns region. Going on to interviews now, one of the key questions presented to the participants, and remember there were 21 of those, was what are the creative strengths of the Cairns region? And overwhelmingly, the one that came through was the environment. If you've been to Cairns, you will get a sense of why that came through so strongly. Reef, rainforest, beaches, tablelands, coastal areas, beautiful locations. Other strong themes that came through was a sense of community, a sense of strong support within the community. There was also reference to the collective of artists in the little village location northwest of Cairns called Kuranda, which has got very strong creative practice. The Indigenous art was recognised as a major strength of the location. So location and place were identified as being significant strengths of the region. On the other hand, when looking at impediments to creativity, location and place brought with it significant challenges. The top 3, distance. Cairns is very isolated in the sense of its distance from the state capital of Brisbane, which is about 1,800 kilometres. Further down to Sydney and Melbourne, it is very, very far away. Australia is a big place. Allied to distance is cost. Cost of travel, cost of touring exhibitions, cost of accessing professional development in capital cities, for example. So distance and cost strongly aligned to place and location. A third key one that came through in terms of an impediment is support. Support in the broad sense, but specifically access to infrastructure and space, which was a frequently referred to issue, the cost of using space, lack of specialist creative space. Professional development was referred to frequently. It's hard to develop our creative practice in Cairns. There are limited professional development opportunities. But also support from some of the organisations. While there are key organisations in Cairns and most locations for supporting artists, many of them felt it difficult to access that support. So it's interesting that place and location for Cairns is its main strengths, but it also causes its main challenges. Interesting for local planners and even state and federal government to consider for such a regional location. Interviews also brought up the issue of, well, how do we grow the sector? How do we improve creativity? How do we grow creative industries? And partnerships came through most frequently. One of the most obvious we could think of would be education and training. Train more artists, train more people to be creative practitioners, and that came through the most. 73% of people referred to that. Number 2 was tourism. Not surprising, I guess, for Cairns because it is one of the top tourism centres in Queensland and Australia. But these artists said we need to partner more with tourism. 3 other areas referred to were ICT, or information and communication technologies, retail, for example, artists saying let's get our work in stores and fashion designers, etc. And accommodation and food came in last, in the sense of let's maybe partner up with restaurants, let's look at large-scale cultural events where food and art work together. So there's some really interesting ideas put forward there. So the one that I found most interesting, particularly for Cairns, is the references to tourism. So in the interviews, people were asked to consider, well, how might this work? Give us some specific examples. One of the views was tourism needs to take us, the artists, more seriously. We are producing great work or interesting work. They need to work with us to bring people in to engage with our cultural and our creative activity. Another view was that presented by an artist who talked about the fact that tourism should be far more aware of what we do, not only locally but further away. If Cairns is such a strong tourism location, then tourism workers in capital cities down south should be aware of the arts as well. Then we get a very different view. One artist referred to the fact that they thought it would be very detrimental because tourism implies a certain style of creative practice or work, trinkets, small pieces of work for people to come home. And this person's view was don't become reliant on that, focus on your own creativity. So a very different view there. And finally, another artist referred to the need for a stronger relationship between the creative workers and the tourism industry. Tourism needs to know more about what we need to do, and they did acknowledge that perhaps they need to know a little bit more about what's happening in tourism. So in terms of longer term growth, the 3 sort of main questions that came through in my research, and keeping in mind this is preliminary research about Cairns, are the following questions. Firstly, what specific and tangible partnerships should be formed, not only now but for the longer term? And that's partnerships not only within the creative industries, so between the practitioners, but with other sectors. And you'll remember we talked about tourism as being one of the most frequently referred to. The second question that comes out of all of this is what should occur or what might occur in terms of space. Cairns, like many regional locations, and particularly around the city centre, have lots of empty buildings. The old traditional city centre mall or location, particularly in regional locations, has its challenges. And Cairns has many empty buildings in the city. How might creative practitioners work with council, work with city planners to take advantage of that empty space, to bring creativity to the city and to bring people back into the city as well? And thirdly and finally, the key question to come from this research is what leadership is needed? What leadership is needed by government, whether it's federal, state or local? What might they do to change some of these problems or challenges for the sector, for the creative industries in Cairns? There's also a leadership issue for the participants, the creative workers, the support workers, the embeddeds. There is a fragmentation in the creative industries. So what leadership needs to happen? Should there be an overarching group that represents the whole sector? If there should be, who should be a part of that? And how might that group play a leadership role? And finally, the different sectors in terms of, for example, tourism, creative industries, ICT, education and training, how might they work together more effectively as leaders to help grow and build not only their own sector, but the creative industries as well. So in summary, there's some interesting findings about a particular location, in this case the regional city of Cairns in far north Queensland, Australia. Many of those findings can be seen in other locations, but there are some particular challenges which also represent opportunities for Cairns, and most notably that's around its location, its strong tourism presence, and the opportunities that have been identified as possibilities to grow the creative industries. This study has lots of extra findings and lots of detail, lots that I can share with you. Unfortunately, it would take a lot longer than this to do so. So if you'd like detail, please contact me, Professor Ryan Daniel. I'm at James Cook University in Australia, and specifically the School of Creative Arts. To find my details, go to www.jcu.edu.au/SOCA or SOCA. That's the homepage for our school, and you'll find me on the staff listing. Thank you.